Great, thank you. We can see you, Mark. Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning to all. Welcome to this webinar of the School of Governance of the Organization of American States, implemented in the framework of the project Promoting an Open Government Ecosystem in Belize by the Trust for the Americas and the Department for Effective Public Management of the OAS, with the support of the Embassy of the United States of America in Belize. My name is Mike Mora. I'm a specialist with the Department for Effective Public Management of the OAS and oversee different initiatives on digital government, open data, among others. I will be moderating this webinar from OAS headquarters in Washington, D.C. It is a pleasure to address this webinar. I should also note that our project local coordinator, Mr. Henry Wade, is hosting at this time in collaboration with the Central Information Technology Office of the Government of Belize, CITO, an on-site version of this webinar in CITO's office in Belmopan. Thank you to CITO and all participants gathering there. In this webinar, we're going to dive into the basics of open government and the success experiences that positioned Canada and the United States at the forefront of governance innovation. We will touch on the principles behind digital delivery and openness, the opportunities and challenges, and the ways to overcome them at the light of these experiences. But most importantly, we will discuss about how to bring down open government to the very life of citizens and how this improves public management and governance. For that, we could not ask for a better set of speakers. I'm not only excited of having this high quality expert group talking about such an important issue as open government and innovation, but I should highlight how lucky we are of having them all three together sharing their experiences. I want to thank the speakers for taking the time of their very busy agendas to join us in this conversation for Belize and in Belize. So the speakers and the topics for these webinars are, we're going to start with a view of what is open government and how it works. Mr. Joe Powell, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Open Government Partnership, will be speaking to us on that subject, followed by a discussion on openness in the U.S. with Mary Beth Goodman. She's a former OGP country lead for the U.S. government. And finally, we will close the presentations talking of open government and public innovation at the light of the experience of Canada with Mr. Mark Levine, Senior Advisor on Open Government of the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. I will have the opportunity to present them one by one as we move along on this webinar. But before that, here are some basic instructions for all participants. The very first one is please send us your questions, any questions that you have. Don't wait until the end. Send us the questions using the chat tool that you will find at the bottom right of your screens. Again, do not wait until the end as we will be collecting those questions for the speakers. Then, because of the format of the online seminars, we will run all three presentations, one after the other, no break in between. And then we'll close with a discussion at the end based on the questions that you send us in the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive the link on this webinar to watch the video, to share, along with the PowerPoint presentations that the speakers will present. And so again, I will encourage you to share this knowledge on open government widely. So thank you very much. We have in camera Mark, and together in the Open Gov Hub, here in Washington, D.C. It's Joe, Powell, and Mary Beth Goodman. Thank you, all of you. So let me ask you to please turn off your cameras, at least Mark, because the first speaker is Joe, and I'm gonna turn off mine as well, and we're gonna continue with this webinar. So our first speaker is Joe Powell. Mr. Powell is the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Open Government Partnership, OGP. He leads OGP's global engagement, including working with the OGP Steering Committee, the OGP Summits, and linking OGP with the other multilateral processes. He previously worked for the One Campaign, where he was managing One's global campaign for increased transparency in the extractive industries. As Senior Policy and Advocacy Manager at One, Joe also led global advocacy on the G20 and policy development for the 2013 G8. Prior to working at One, Joe launched an online current affairs platform called Uganda Talks for the Independent, a weekly East African news magazine, and worked for Action Aid Uganda. He studied at Makerere University, I hope I pronounced that right, and holds a bachelor's from the University of Cambridge. Joe, it's a pleasure having you here. You have the microphone while I put your presentation on.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you very much to Mike and the OAS for hosting this webinar, and it looks like we have a good audience of people, so thank you very much for joining. I just want to talk very briefly about the organization I come from by way of introduction, the Open Government Partnership, and then tell a few stories and examples of why open government can really make a difference for you to think about in the Belize context. And then I know we have very good speakers from US and Canada that will talk more about their experience as well. So just for those of you that don't know the Open Government Partnership, or OGP, OGP was founded in 2011 by 8 governments and 9 civil society leaders, including at the time President Obama and leaders from Brazil, Mexico, UK, South Africa, Philippines, Indonesia, and Norway. And really the idea was to create a new type of multilateral partnership to support reformers working on open government, both in civil society and in government. And it's grown very fast since then to 76 national members. We also have 20 local governments who are participating. So this is a multi-stakeholder platform. And just to give you some ideas of some of the principles behind OGP, it really has at its heart an equal partnership between government and civil society, both internationally and nationally. It's very much based on learning and accountability. So there is a regular system of reporting on what countries are doing and peer learning and exchange internationally. But it's very action orientated. So unlike some other big international organizations, it is not heavy on bureaucracy and communiques and so on. It's really about supporting reformers in countries like Belize around the world who are trying to open up their government. And it's a very universal platform. So we don't rank countries on openness. We think every country can improve, regardless of where you're from in the world or what income level. We think everyone has something to share and something to improve in their own context. So that's just very briefly about OGP, and I'll come back at the end briefly on how countries who are not members, like Belize, could consider joining. But before that, I just wanted to, in a sense, start by just talking about about co-creation and why government and civil society why and how they can work together. And we've just published a new toolkit on co-creation, which I can share in the chat box after I finish speaking, which has examples from around the world of how government and civil society are working together. And the reason we think this is so important is because we know that civil society is often pushing for government to be more open, and government itself has, is not a monolithic entity. There are some parts of government that are trying to be more open, others which may be pushing back. And we believe that the partnership of government and civil society can actually work together to advance certain reforms. So it's not just about a process of dialogue together. It's also about advancing specific reforms that matter to citizens in Belize or any other country. And just on the slide here is some principles of what we think makes good participation and collaboration with government and civil society. So we think that there needs to be dissemination and transparency of information. So government is giving information to citizens about how they can engage their government. What are the mechanisms, the tools, the channels for citizens and civil society to engage their government? That needs to be transparent and open so people know where to use it. We also believe there should be a dialogue. So in some places, the way participation is done is you just have a consultation and collect ideas. And that's a good first step, but the government then needs to be responsive and to actually have a dialogue between government and civil society. So it's not just a one-way consultation, it becomes a true partnership. And obviously that is difficult to do and it takes time, but we think the rewards are really powerful. And then finally, and this is specifically within OGP, we think there needs to be a government and civil society should work together to assess progress and challenges. So it's not just civil society campaigning or pushing from the outside. They actually need to work with government together to solve challenges. So we're talking about changing the relationship from a culture of maybe more adversarial relationship to something which is more about cooperation and collaboration. So that's more on the process side, but I think the easiest way to explain open government, as Mike asked me to do in the introduction, is just to talk about some concrete examples of why this made a difference. So the first one I wanted to mention is on the Philippines and on a service delivery challenge they had in the Philippines. So in the Philippines, it was estimated that between 30 and 50% of local infrastructure spending was being lost due to various leakages, either inefficiency or overinflated contracts, or even in some cases corruption. So in response, the government decided to launch an open roads initiative focused on road construction. And what this did is it required the government to disclose all of the spending it was making on road projects. And they geocoded that spending to the local level so people knew how much was being allocated for a specific road in their community, so people could understand the budget and the spending for each road in each community. They then went a step further and they actually commissioned, through the State Audit Commission of Audit, they commissioned citizens to provide an audit of whether the road was being constructed on time and the quality of the contractors, and to track any waste or fraud that was happening in the system. So that then provided a feedback loop from citizens back to government, and they estimated they were saving up to $300,000 of per ghost road. So they were estimated that they had these ghost roads that were never constructed, that were costing the government a lot of money. And this system of open roads is an example of how they try to tackle that problem. So that's one example on infrastructure. The second example I wanted to use is from Ukraine. This is on procurement and corruption in the procurement system. So you may know in Ukraine, there were major corruption scandals around public procurement, overinflated contracts being delivered to certain friends of political leaders in Ukraine. And so the government and civil society in Ukraine came together to launch an open contracting initiative called ProZorro. And the idea of ProZorro is that you disclose all contracts online and allow them to be searchable by the public, by business and the private sector, by journalists, by anyone who has an interest in that information. And it also allowed, in the contracting process, opportunities for bids of government contracts to be open, which resulted in more small and medium enterprises being able to access government contracts. And so what's happened because of ProZorro? Over 2 years, the government estimates they saved $700 million in terms of more efficient procurement and cheaper contracts, more competition in public procurement sector. And it also allowed citizens to flag potential issues of contracts. So again, this is an example of an open government reform where it has transparency, which is disclosing the contract, participation in that people can then flag issues around whether they think the contract is a fair one or not, and then accountability because the government has to respond on whether that flag from the citizen was fair or not. So this is another example from the contracting infrastructure space. The final set of examples I wanted to present to you are on climate sustainability. So I know this is a big issue in Belize. So let me just give you 2 examples around open government supporting climate sustainability. The first one is from Indonesia. Indonesia has been developing a one map portal. Historically in Indonesia, there have been lots of questions about land ownership. Who owns what land? Who can decide whether to cut down a forest or to use it for different purposes? Was very contested. So they decided to create this one map initiative focused on forest management. And the idea of one map is to digitize all of the records on land ownership online, but also to allow citizens and civil society to input their information on who they think controls what land. So this is not just a formal land rights initiative. It actually has participation where people are able to say, this piece of land is controlled by this person. And so it's a collaborative system of mapping licenses of who owns and controls land, which could be very interesting in the Belize context. The second one comes from Central America, from Honduras. And this initiative is around local authorities working together with the population to collectively identify and evaluate threats and risks in terms of disaster management and improve access to information around those risks. So for example, it includes working together on early warning systems, on reducing basic risk factors through territorial planning measures, so around forestry and making decisions over land use. But really the point is that to effectively manage climate risk, government and civil society must work together in order to do that. And this is what Honduras have been trying to do through this initiative on disaster risk management. So just to summarize, these are three areas of open government reform that could be relevant to Belize. I'm sure Mary Beth and Mark will talk about other areas. We believe open government is a strategic tool to actually advance reform in many different policy areas that are relevant to your context. So I've given 4 country examples, but there are many thousands of other examples that are out there that could be relevant for all of the people on this webinar. So finally, to take it back to the Open Government Partnership, this map that you can see right on your screen now is all of the countries who are members of OGP. So these are the 76 national governments that have joined. You can see that in the Americas region, we actually have a very high density of members. So many of your neighbors are already participating in OGP. We also have very high density in Europe and Eastern Europe, and we are needing to expand more membership in Africa and Asia and the Pacific. But this just gives you an idea of who is currently a member. So how does a country join OGP if you're not currently a member? The first thing is we have eligibility criteria for joining OGP. And this means that every country that joins has to have a certain level of fiscal transparency, of access to information, of asset disclosure from politicians and senior civil servants. And there needs to be a degree of civic space in the country. So can civil society and citizens freely operate in the context? And we know this is a big challenge globally at the moment of closing civic space in many countries. So if you meet these 4 criteria, then the country is welcome to join OGP and begin the process of working with civil society and citizens to come up with some of the reforms that will be relevant in Belize, similar to the ones I just talked about. So I think later in the question and answer, I can answer more specific questions if people are interested in how Belize should join. But for now, that completes my presentation.
Thank you.
So I'll hand over to Mary Beth or to Mike. Maybe you want to just introduce.
Thank you very much, Joe, for your presentation. Very rich, and as you might see, I hope so. You get a good view there of the chat. There are several comments and questions already and reactions to your presentation. So it is great. Thank you very much. As you said, Joe, our second guest speaker is Mary Beth Goodman. Mary Beth is an international development and anti-corruption policy expert who has extensively worked to advance democracy, human rights, and social justice with governments, civil society organizations, the private sector, and international institutions. She served as the special assistant to President Obama and as a senior director for development, democracy, and humanitarian affairs at the White House, where she was responsible for advising the president and national security advisor on a wide range of issues, including open government. Ms. Goodman previously served as a U.S. diplomat, including in a variety of overseas postings and in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, Ms. Goodman practiced international trade law and worked on an attorney advisor for U.S. Customs and Border Protection at the Department of Homeland Security, and oversaw the implementation of preferential trade programs for Africa and the Caribbean. Ms. Goodman has a degree in international comparative law from Georgetown University, a Juris Doctor from Chicago-Kent College of Law, and a Bachelor of Arts from James Madison University. Also, very glad to have you here, Mary Beth, sharing with us. Thank you for joining us on this webinar, and the mic is all yours. I'm going to upload your presentation here now.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be here as well. I think that we have a mix of civil society, government officials perhaps, as well as some academics on here. So at times, some of my comments will be geared towards civil society, and at other times, some comments will be geared towards government officials. I have sat on both sides of the fence, if you will, at times during my career. So I know that there are some complexities and some opportunities that exist for both civil society as well as government officials. And at times it's a push-pull on both sides as you're working through some of the opportunities and challenges for open government. So it takes both to really make this work, and it is a collaborative effort, particularly with the Open Government Partnership. I feel very fortunate to have worked for under President Obama to help develop the open government as well as Open Government Partnership, because he believed very strongly in the need for civil society to be a partner in this effort. He obviously had worked for the early part of his career as a grassroots leader, and he really believed in the power of civil society to help develop that contact with citizens, and for civil society to help push government to be more open and to be more transparent. And so that was very much part of his belief when we helped develop the concept of the Open Government Partnership. And as part of the Open Government Partnership, on the steering committee, which is the sort of government oversight unit, civil society and government sit side by side, and they help sort of develop the oversight mechanisms for the partnership. And they have a complete sort of governance structure as one vote for each. There's no hierarchy of governments being higher than civil society. And as you're developing your national action plans for the OGP, civil society has a voice in that as you're developing it for your government. So a lot of the ideas that we developed for our open government efforts in the US came from civil society. And so it really was a great opportunity to learn from civil society, but I have to say at times it was a lot of frustration because there are limits on what government is able to do. I mean, government is the safeguard for a lot of information that citizens provide to the government. And so government has the responsibility to safeguard some of that information and to protect the privacy of citizens when that information is to provide that information, when citizens provide that information. So there is some push-pull that is developed there. So with that, I'm going to jump into my presentation. Joe might have to show me where I go to develop my slides. There we go. Okay, so President Obama came into office in 2008, and one of the first initiatives that he signed, or was elected in 2008, assumed office in 2009, excuse me, one of the first initiatives that he signed was an executive order for open government. He wanted there to be as much transparency as possible. So he signed an open government executive order in 2009, and then we worked to help create the initiative, as Joe explained, for the Open Government Partnership in 2011. There have been 3 open government national action plans that the U.S. has done for OGP. Even with the transition of government to the Trump administration, we are still very active in the Open Government Partnership, the U.S. is, and those action plans are still active. We also had another executive order that was very important for what we'll go through here, called the Open Data for Open Data Initiative. And that executive order was signed in 2013. So what I'm going to do is just run through a few examples of how we were able to implement some of these initiatives. These slides are all going to be available. There are a few websites mentioned in here which you'll be able to access and look at these things in more detail if you would like. So governments, all governments, as I said, sit on an enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of data sets across an enormous amount of sectors, whether it's health, energy, education, transportation, law. The U.S. government had over 190,000 data sets. And so when we did the Open Data Initiative, we had a concerted effort to open those up and make as much of that as available as possible. And so we created a website where we made this available. It's called data.gov. It's still operational. And we allowed government, particularly academics, we found, were using this information for their own research. And so this website allows you to look by subject matter, and all of the data sets are combined across all of our government agencies. So there might be agricultural data from, of course, the Department of Agriculture, but there's also agricultural data from the Department of Commerce, or perhaps the Department of Education, or perhaps the Department of Health and Human Services. And so on this website, we were able to combine all of these data sets together under this particular heading. And what it did was allow there to be more collaboration among government agencies, but it also opened it up so that citizens were able to have access to this type of government data and to have more availability to do their own research, do their own type of entrepreneurial endeavors to spur some of the innovations that we see coming out of Silicon Valley or other places. One of the things that we did often see was that not just was information siloed within a particular government agency between different departments, it was often not shared among government agencies. So this was a way to open that up so that we had more engagement and, again, more citizen engagement with government. So one of the things that when we were engaging with citizens and trying to find out what they wanted to know about their government, it was often, how is government spending the money? How are you spending the tax dollars that we are giving to you? What are you doing with the budget money? And so that was part of our open government initiative, right? How do we track the money that is coming in that the citizens are benefiting from? And so that was a big part of our open government initiative, our open data initiative on both ends. We had websites that tracked the budget, but frankly, they were not very useful. They were not very engaging unless you were a complete wonk and really wanted to dig into tons of columns of budget data. You were not able to understand it. So we completely revamped our budget websites across numerous government agencies and consolidated that information to make it more user-friendly to the average citizen so that they could understand it in a very concise, easy way. And a lot of these websites, when you dig into it, for the one that has the map of the United States, we were able to try to then go state by state to show those federal dollars that were going to the state so they could see how the money from the federal government was being spent in that state. So if the federal government was giving California a grant for a particular road or a grant for a bridge, then they were able to see that amount of money and how much was going towards that bridge. Then you could go see if that bridge was being built or what was happening. It sounds a bit simplistic for something like that to need to be done in the United States, but you would be surprised how many budgets we have passed here where people did not know that the federal government was giving them money for a bridge to be built in California. There's a very famous case of a bridge that was supposed to be built in Alaska, and there was money given year after year after year for this bridge to be built in Alaska. And it is literally called the bridge to nowhere because there was a bridge being built, but it was not connected to anything on the other side. And it's a very famous case of just government waste happening here in the United States. So it happens in every country. And so there is a great need to track this budgetary spending. And citizens have a very important role in helping to do that in a much more granular way than has traditionally been able to be done without the type of open government and open data that we now have the ability to do thanks to the internet and thanks to the information being more widely available. Okay, so again, I'm just giving some examples of how we went about determining what citizens really were interested in. And so this is an example. If you look on the right side of the screen, we really weren't certain what, of all of the government websites we had, and there were thousands of them, what on earth were people actually even using from our government websites? And so we actually debated this, and then we decided that we would just get some of our techie people to create an analytical tool to monitor for about 90 days which government websites people actually logged on to use. And so that's what that screenshot is on the right-hand side. We actually just kept track of how many users we had and what websites they actually logged on to and what data sets they might have downloaded or what they looked at. And it actually was a bit of a surprise to us. No surprise, I guess it's the time of year that we did it. The number one site that they looked at is where's my refund, because they wanted to know when they were going to get their IRS money back for their tax refund. They were also very interested in the weather, above all. A lot of data being used by, I guess, local weather channel people to do their nightly forecasts and that sort of thing. So it was more scientific data. Also some interest in people who wanted to know about campaign finance reform, because we had a lot of local elections going on at that time. So there were some, different types of uses. But again, it does show the interest that government citizens have. This might be a way in Belize for you to see how people are even using government data that you already have, or if they are. I mean, it could be interesting to see if people even log on to government websites, and then you would know whether they're useful or not. All right. Oh. All right, sorry about that. Okay, public participation. Again, this is really what this is all about. How do you get government to be more engaged with, how do you get people to be more engaged with government? And so one of the ideas that we had to try and get more citizens engaged with us as government, how do we do that? We actually had the idea to create petitions. And so we called that We the People. And this is one of the things that, unfortunately, the Trump administration has stopped now. But we wanted to create a way to hear from average American citizens what they wanted the government to do. And so we created We the People petitions. And when we first started, we weren't sure this was going to work. And so we said, all right, you can create a petition about anything you want. It has to be something that is, we had certain metrics. It has to be something that is actually doable, has to be relevant. You had to get 150 people to agree to sign your petition. They had to be verifiable users so that they had a US address and we could verify that they were American citizens. And you had to have them sign on within 30 days. Well, it turns out that a lot of people were paying attention and we were completely overwhelmed. So we had to very quickly change the metrics because 150 people turned out to be a crazy low number. And so we upped the number of people that you had to get for your co-signees for your petition to 10,000. Well, that again turned out to be a ridiculously low number because people really caught on to this petition. And so the number ended up, by the time we were leaving the White House, you had to have 100,000 people sign on to your petition within 30 days. And that too turned out to be okay. People really were paying attention to this. So the petitions turned out to be anything from change the amount of time that you have for a certain regulation to be in the Federal Register for notice and comment. If it was something relating to clean energy or climate change rules, we want more time so that civil society has time to really debate this and get our coalition together to change the amount of rubber pelts that were in the asphalt grass on soccer fields because it was dangerous, people felt. I mean, and we would take these petitions at the White House and sort of farm them out to the experts across the government agencies. We would get people to write something, and within 90 days, we would publish a response to these petitions on the government White House website. And so it turned out to be a very effective way of actually having a response back to people and going about instituting some real effective dialogue with people about what was going on in their community that they wanted their government to do. And not all of it resulted in change, because it turns out that people just didn't realize how some of this was actually already part of what government was doing. They just didn't realize how it impacted their community. But it was real dialogue that was happening between citizens and their government. As I said, the White House decided to end this practice. I think it stopped in December of 2016. You can look online and still find this because it's been archived as part of the Obama presidency, as part of the National Archives, but it is no longer a viable link to submit new petitions. Okay, another example of just public participation. Again, how does civil society help engage with people? How do you engage as a government with citizens? We did all sorts of things. We tried crowdsourcing ideas. We tried doing citizen science participation. The science agencies tend to have a lot of different data sets. You know, whether you're working on climate change or different types of efforts, they have a lot of wonderful data sets that are often siloed and not used. So we did a lot of data efforts with citizen science, trying to get all across the United States, trying to get citizen scientists to help us with our weather, right? So we would have them like take data sets, measure it over set periods of time, and send that information into NASA or some of our other science agencies. We did challenges, we did prizes. One of the more sort of efforts that I really liked, when the Ebola epidemic was happening in West Africa, it was just a terrible effort, and it was happening so fast. And so we did a grand prize, as we called it. And there weren't a lot of resources in Liberia and other places, but in Liberia in particular, it was just happening and spreading so fast. And so we did a grand prize, as we called it, where we limited people to having rubber gloves, duct tape, rubber boots, and I think mosquito netting. And we asked them to try and create a way to have an Ebola suit so that doctors and caregivers could go into villages and have some sort of protection without getting contaminated. And so it was described very precisely of like what sort of ingredients they could have, and someone came up with something, right? So that they would have just these basic elements, and someone created a suit that actually worked, that the NIH approved, and that won the prize, and we were able to use it in Liberia. And have it be like instructions that were given to some of the villagers in Liberia, with just giving them some very basic, locally purchased elements. And so that was like something that was very useful, and just we were able to do it. I'm trying to move on quickly here. So education, another one that we just tried to do very quickly. There's so many schools in the US. A lot of people didn't know like opportunities that were available. People that were not citizens, some of the dreamers that you've heard about, people that have not yet become US citizens, but they've been here for a while. Some schools will accept them, some schools will not. So we just created an opportunity for people to do research where they could do this without being tracked online or anything, and find out where they could go to school. Okay. Another initiative that we created was, no doubt if you've seen anything on the US TV, you know that there are still racial tensions and police violence on the nightly news here. So we tried to find a way to actually use, this slide got cut off there, I think, but to try and use open government as a way to show that you could use open government to help deal with some of the current issues that were so just in the daily news and that were causing so much tension among citizens. And so we were able to create this police data initiative as a way to try and restore trust between government and some of the citizens that were being just so confronted by police and some of the injustice in the law enforcement activity. So 26 jurisdictions around the country agreed to provide data around the use of force, around vehicle and pedestrian stops, and around officer-involved shootings. This is still going on. And so this has actually been super effective as a way to have this data be used to really keep track of some of the racial and police ongoing sort of collaboration, but also some of the injustice issues, to have real data sets to use when this kind of keeps erupting here in the US. Okay, if I were sitting in Belize right now, I might have some ideas for what you could do, but I might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed because US and Canada are presenting, they're sort of super developed, where do we even start? So I thought I would throw one thing in here that could be a way to even begin to get your head around some of these ideas. 2015, all 193 nations agreed to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals. Belize was certainly part of that effort. The Global Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals include literally a wide variety of opportunities to make commitments around education, health, social justice, climate change, food security, you name it, it's in there. Civil society, government, private sector, it is impossible to meet these goals unless everyone works together to try to commit to meet these. I'm sure that there is already some work ongoing to try and do some of these efforts, but I wanted to show you some of the work that the US did, and Mike tells me that it's going to open up this website for me. I hope that works. Okay, so one of the efforts that the US included was to use our open data efforts to try and keep track of the, hope that works, to try and keep track, there we go, to try and keep track of our Sustainable Development Goals commitments. And so we created a website to have, okay, good. Mike's gonna open that up for me, I think. Can you start that website, Mike? Just start here if you click that. Yes, thank you. So to try and keep track of this, we created our own sort of metrics. Yes, that's fine. You can leave it here. And so what we did was just create a very basic sort of website, if you will, with the indicators from this. I'll tell you what, I'm going to click on life below water, number 14, just because that's sort of very relevant for Belize in particular. Everybody has committed to these goals, and under each of the goals, there are indicators. And so every country is supposed to be meeting these indicators. What we did was trying to map these out, and everyone is trying to come up with their metrics to do this. It's very simplistic, but this is the effort we have, and you can see that we're trying to constantly create new data to meet these indicators and to do this. And so this website still exists. It is constantly being updated with new data as more of the agencies come together and collate the data to bring this together. So again, very sort of easy way to maybe start coming together around some of these goals as a way to kickstart some of the effort of where do you begin? Because there is there's no right or wrong place of where to start. It's just coming together to figure out how you're going to get your first meeting together and agree to start. There's always a million ideas. And there's always a lot of work to do, but I think the hard part is agreeing that you're going to start and to take that first leap and get going. I have just one more, Mike, if we can go back to my PowerPoint presentation very quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Okay. So just some useful tips here. It's, again, easy to get overwhelmed, not know where to start. If there are government officials here, I'm going to direct these comments to you. Within government, it is typical that the higher up in government you go, you tend to be a bit older, more senior in your positions, and yet it is the younger people who tend to know the most about technology. And so if you are going to commit to doing the open data and have the intentionality of bringing in some of the enhanced technological performance to government, it is best to hire the right people to make sure that you can do this. We found in the US that there is great resistance among some of the older people to having to adapt to bring in this new technology. They definitely sort of resisted having to learn some of the newer technological advances. However, the younger people, once they were integrated into the team and were part of the team and truly felt empowered to bring forth some of this new effort, it worked wonderfully. But if we didn't bring the new people on and actually empower them as part of the team, then there was greater resistance and it just did not flow the way that we wanted it to. I will say this, the efforts to bring in the government agencies and have them cooperate together. Once we got some of our budget officials actually involved in the effort as well, among the government agencies, the budget officials certainly know a lot about where the money is going and who is controlling some of the efforts. They are very useful to the effort. And then also some of the science agencies. They are sitting on a lot of the data sets that your government already has. The next slide, Joe. Okay. Convening meetings with civil society. Again, it is an ongoing dialogue with both civil society and government, with government and civil society. It is never possible to have just one meeting. There have got to be meetings both with regional experts, with subject matter experts. You've got to do webinars, you've got to do meetings, you've got to like constantly just keep talking. But I have to say to civil society representatives, when you have the meetings with government, you need to come prepared, right? You need to come with ideas and you need to come with a coordinated effort, right? Oftentimes when civil society meets with government, you will get a meeting and there will be a multitude of civil society representatives and each of you will come with your own agenda. And that makes it really difficult for government officials to have a takeaway so that they can go back and try to implement what it is you're talking to them about. So having a couple of key ideas is great, but having 25 ideas makes it very difficult for government to be able to take what you're giving them and actually make it actionable. For government officials, when you're working on some of your key ideas and you're developing some of these language for some of your commitments on open government or open data, it's really important to meet with civil society before and after you develop that language, because how you word that commitment has specific implications for how civil society will be able to help you implement it. So testing out that language is really, really important. And with that, I really will stop and turn it over to Mike.
Thank you very much, Mary Beth, for your presentation in depth. And, it's great to see. It's great to see how it's come from the OGP perspective, open government collaboration, down very practical experiences that were implemented here in the U.S. So here we are now. Last but not least is our guest speaker, Mark Levine. Mark leads the International and Intergovernmental Group as part of the Government of Canada's Open Government Team at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. He leads the work on national and international open government, working with partners to advance and align government reforms, including work to support Canada's participation in the Open Government Partnership. Mark has been working on open government since 2012, and prior to that, he worked on a variety of different projects at Canada's National Archives, Library and Archives Canada, helping to make Canada documentary heritage more accessible to citizens. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you here, to have the Treasury Board Secretary represented with all the experience on certainly open government, digital government, innovation in general. So thank you very much. Let me see. I need to get you back on the regular screen, which it was moved. There we go. I'm going to load your presentation and then we move on to yours. Okay, all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike, for inviting me to participate. I'm very happy to be here. What I would like to do is I would like to walk through a presentation. I'll echo some of the remarks that Mary Beth and Joe made as well. What I'd like to do is show some areas where we have made progress, highlight some areas where we still have challenges, and then talk a bit about the future and where we're going. Canada has a unique opportunity for us in that we are the incoming government co-chair of the Global Open Government Partnership, and so we will have a chance to sort of put our mark on open government work the same way that the Obama administration had done in the past, and we hope to really follow their example and lead on this. I want to say a couple of remarks before I go into my presentation. One is that a lot of the work that we've been able to do in open government in Canada, we've done incrementally, we've done in an agile fashion. We've not necessarily needed to create new legislation or new policy. We've worked within existing government frameworks. I also want to say that open government is not linear, so don't always expect that there will be progress built upon progress. I think, as Mary Beth illustrated with the US government, that there's not always the opportunity to build on things that have gone before. It needs a constant effort on the part of government and on civil society to keep pushing for work to be done. We've seen examples around the world of great open data portals that have launched and then died. There's nothing worse than stale open data on an open data portal. The work needs to be done to refresh, to update, to continue to add. And I also want to echo the remarks around coordinated effort of civil society to push government to do great things. When we do hear from civil society, we take their remarks and opinions very seriously, and the more organized and effective they are in transmitting the message, the better able we are to use that input to do our work better. So we're right now in a fortunate situation where we do have political leadership on open government. Each minister in the Canadian government received a mandate letter that had open government language in that. As Prime Minister Trudeau announced when he became Prime Minister in November 2015, government and its information must be open by default, and we have taken that to heart. That infuses all of our work on open government. I also want to say that it's not just one department that is responsible for open government. We are in the Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat, so we control the money for the government, but we really rely on the work of all government departments to contribute to our open government efforts. And it's essential that all government departments are playing a part, because we just have a very small part of it, and we really rely on the work of other civil servants across the government to do what it is that we do. We have 4 themes in our last action plan on open government. Open by default, which is about making open information and open data available to Canadian citizens. It's about better fiscal transparency. It's also a lot about innovation and prosperity. There are ways to argue that open government helps increase the economic growth of a country. It's not just transparency and accountability that are important, but there's also a link to economic innovation as well. And there's also a link to better service delivery from the government to its citizens. And it's also about engaging Canadians and the world. We don't see it as just a national commitment. We see this as an international project where we can have peer learning, we can share knowledge, we can work with our peers around the world to do everything better and help everyone out. So I wanted to highlight some areas where we've been able to make some progress over the years. One is our Open Government Portal. So we do have an Open Government Portal. It's on open.canada.ca. We have around 80,000 data sets. We really built on our National Statistical Agency and our Environmental Agency to really kickstart the portal. But right now we have over 60 different government departments and agencies contributing to our portal. It's open source software. We have an open government license which allows unrestricted use and reuse of all the data that is available. We try and make it available in open formats, so not proprietary software, and we try and have a real diverse selection of data available for Canadians that is constantly updated and refreshed. One of the highlights of our open data program is what we call open maps. So we found that one of the most heavily used part of our open data program is about geometric, geospatial, geographic information, and using open source tools and using our natural resources department. We have now over 700 geomatic data sets available to Canadians to help map agricultural data, environmental data, all different sorts of geographic data that can be combined and compared and mixed and reused. One of the great things about our portal that's a really hard story to explain is that when we first launched our portal, we had a lot more data sets available than we have right now. So at one point we were over 200,000 data sets that were available to Canadians, and now we're around 80,000 data sets. We haven't reduced the number of data available to Canadians. We've really put an emphasis on improving data quality. So particularly from the geospatial, we were able to reduce our number of data sets by combining more data together, by really focusing on data quality. So we have fewer data sets, but the amount of available data has actually increased. It's not an easy story to tell our political leaders sometimes that the number of data sets is dropping, but it's really reflective of an emphasis on data quality. The better data quality you have, the more that will drive citizens to use the portal. When citizens find that they have poor data available to them that's not particularly useful for them, or it's inaccurate, that doesn't really help the growth of a portal. So we've really tried to put a focus on data quality. As part of this, what we have done is we've gone to each government department and mandated that they make a list of all the data that they have, and we have released each department's individual list of data sets. Some departments did this better than others, but we now have over 10,000 data listed in data inventory right now. Citizens can look at those data inventories. They can request to open government to departments to make some of that data more available. And it really helps to quantify the known universe of data in the government of Canada. It's an ongoing work, but it's really important for citizens to be able to see that there's not just open data available, but the government holds a lot of other different types of data that could be made available to citizens, and this helps us prioritize the release of open data. We don't have the resources to release all the data of the Government of Canada. That is an ongoing challenge, but if citizens can help departments prioritize what types of data they're looking for, what sort of data sets they're looking for, that can help departments with their limited resources figure out what they should prioritize and what they should work on next. And then we found that one of the biggest gaps in open government is actually the development of skills, not only for citizens, but also within the government itself. And so we've established an open government learning hub where we have a bunch of different open government resources. We're adding some videos. We're doing all sorts of skills development of Canada for Canadians and for Canadian government workers. One of the big things that we worked on last year was what we call a do-it-yourself open data toolkit. This is aimed at Canadian municipalities to help them find the ways to start open data programs of their own. We worked with a civil society organization called Open North to develop it. And it's based on the principles of something called the Open Data Charter, which is a principle-based approach to open data that has 6 principles. And so that's reflected in our do-it-yourself toolkit. I'll post the link to that in the chat so you can go and have a look at it. But it's really how do I start an open data program in my municipality or my district or my province, and then what are the next steps I need to take? What are the factors I need to consider? What kind of software is available freely and openly, is available to me to deploy? And it's really a starter kit, and we hope that it's of value to a lot of areas that don't necessarily have developed open data programs and are looking for where to start. In Canada, open government is really a pan-Canadian effort. So we are a federation, we have a federal government, and then we have a series of 10 provinces and 3 territories and thousands of cities. In Canada, like in the United States, there are divided responsibilities. And when Canadians are searching for information or data on transportation, on health, and on education, for 3 big examples, these are divided responsibilities, and the federal government doesn't hold all the relevant data. A lot of the data, particularly on health and education and transportation, is held by the provinces. So we're trying to figure out ways, following the example of data.gov, to represent both provincial data and federal data in our open data portal, so citizens don't need to understand the complexities of our Constitution, understand who's responsible for highways or who's responsible for hospitals. They just need to know that they can find the data that they're looking for, regardless of which jurisdiction owns it. So we're working to federate data. We're doing a pilot project with the province of Alberta to do this. We hope to loop in other provinces as we go forward, and we're really excited about this work. As Mary Beth and Joe both mentioned, a key part of open government work is that public and stakeholder engagement and outreach. We have established a multi-stakeholder forum. There's a picture of the participants at the bottom left of the screen. This has been really helpful for the development of our 4th plan, which is currently a work in progress that we're going to deliver this summer. We have really tried to work with civil society in Canada to improve the work that we do, to be more responsive to citizens. As Mary Beth mentioned, it is an ongoing process. It comes with ebbs and flows. Sometimes you get along with civil society, sometimes they challenge you, and it's really been an exciting learning opportunity for us to learn how to work with Canadians better, because at the end of the day, it's Canadians to whom we deliver our products and services, and so we really need their input in informing all of the work that we do. So I wanted to highlight a couple of areas that we're working on now that we're calling sort of open government innovation. So really we're trying to bring Canadian government into the 21st century in terms of delivering digital services to Canadians. The federal government is a very large organization. There's over 250,000 public servants in Canada. We still rely on a lot of analog tools to deliver our services. There are still a lot of forms. There are still a lot of departments that require you to access a PDF and then to download the PDF and then to fill it in with a pen and then scan it and resubmit it. We're not completely digital, so that's one of the areas that we're really working on to make our government more digital. We're looking at this innovation aspect both inside and outside of government. We do not own all the knowledge as government employees. We really rely on non-government organizations, on civil society, on the private sector to help deliver our services better. And this is all part of a larger modernization program that we're helping to deliver in full consultation with civil society. So one of the ways that we're doing this is what we're calling open by default. And so largely what has happened in the past is that the information, particularly documents and reports that we have released to Canadians, are what we call official publications. So they have been vetted by communications, they have been approved by a high level of senior government, they have been almost sort of become communication products rather than real working documents. So we've been working with 4 different government departments to make working level documents available to Canadians. Canadians can go to our Open by Default pilot project. They can see works in progress. So it's not the final document, it's us working through a bunch of different issues and figuring out how we're doing it as we're going along. And we're kind of opening the window to Canadians to see us going along. We're just about to enter phase 2 of this project, where we're going to expand it quite a bit within our own department. So we're really working through all of the challenge of doing this. Canada is a fully bilingual country, both English and French, and so both of our all of our documents need to be available in both official languages. That's a significant challenge for us. Translation can be very expensive at times, so we are doing some small experimentations with machine learning for automated translation. We also have accessibility challenges, so we need to make sure that everything that we put out on our websites, everything that we publish, is accessible by people with visual impairments, for example. So we really need to figure out how can we make this information both bilingual and fully accessible. That's a significant piece of work, but we're just trying small, agile experiments as we go along to try and make sure that we really publish our work to the satisfaction of all Canadians. And performance tracking. So as Joe can tell you a lot more, one of the biggest challenges with the Open Government Partnership is that countries often come up with a wonderful set of ambitious commitments, but the implementation of those commitments over a 2-year period does not necessarily meet their initial ambition. We've had our own challenges on that in Canada, where we've had great plans to start with, and then as we've worked our way through the 2-year cycle on fulfilling those commitments, things have changed and we've not always met all of our promises. So we are really looking at performance tracking, so quarterly reporting public on our website to make sure that Canadians know where we are on track and where we are facing struggles, and we're trying to be open and honest about the nature of those struggles, whether those struggles are resources, whether what we committed to in fact does not actually work. We're happy to fail and fail quickly when we promise something and then are unable to deliver. If we're able to figure out why we're failing and we fail quick, then we can realign ourselves and find a way to do that that's successful without going through a whole process and then realizing at the end that what we wanted to do won't work. So we're really trying to be more honest and accountable in our progress. And if you go to open.canada.ca, you can see our performance tracker. Finally, I'd like to talk a bit about the global leadership aspect of this and how we can share our experiences and our peer learning a little more. We were elected for the first time in March 2017 to the Open Government's Steering Committee. We were selected in October to be the incoming government chair, and in 2018, in October, we'll assume the position of government chair. Our minister, Scott Bryson, is heavily engaged in the open government file, and we're really focusing our international priority in collaboration with our civil society co-chair, Nathaniel Heller, of Results for Development, on 3 particular areas. So one is inclusion, ensuring that open government efforts support the greater inclusion of traditionally marginalized or underrepresented people. For us, that takes on a variety of different aspects. Canada has a lot of Aboriginal population, whether it's First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, who have not been heavily involved in our open government work to date. We're also increasingly discovering that there really is a gender aspect to open government, and we're doing a lot of work on developing, working with the Carter Center, working with Nathaniel Heller on a feminist open government strategy. We also work with the International Development Research Center, which is an arms-length organization in Ottawa, IDRC. So we're really trying to figure out how we can be more inclusive. The second part is around participation. So it's opening up data and information to inspire innovation and making public engagement and civic participation elements part of our public policy development. So it's one thing to have a small number of active voices. It's better to have a large number of active voices. So we're actively looking at ways that we can enlarge the number of people that we talk to. We found as an open government program in Canada for the first 5 or 6 years that we often talk to the same people who bring the same demands to the table. Those demands are always valid, but we find that open government work can be much more useful to a lot of communities and a lot of stakeholders who aren't aware of the work that we're doing. So we're really trying to figure out ways that we can make the participation aspect of our work a lot more effective and a lot more wider known. And then the third comes back to that impact. So it's about making clear targets. It's about undertaking honest and accountable reporting on progress and publicly reporting on that. So we really want our action plan commitments. We really want our open government impact at the end of the day to influence the work.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this excellent presentation. Both experiences, the US and the Canada experience, are very rich, of course, evolved greatly, and it is good that you could share all that on this in this webinar, especially with this project and the idea of strengthening the open government ecosystem in Belize. So I want to thank you very much. I actually want to thank all of the 3 guest speakers. Now that we're going to move on to a discussion session based on the questions that you have submitted on the chat. But before that, I want to acknowledge the fact that we are live on Facebook, and there's a number of people connected there. And also I want to thank the leadership of CITO, the Central Information Technology Office of Belize, who partnered with us to host an on-site venue of this webinar, who's hosting a diverse group of people there as well. Lastly, for those interested in learning more about this project and open government in general, keep in touch with our local project coordinator, Mr. Henry Wade. He will be available to you, and keep in mind that one of the main objectives of this project is to strengthen the open government ecosystem in Belize. So we would like for you to engage with the project. I'll share his email address. He's listening to us right now in Belmopan with the CITO at the CITO venue, but I'll share his email address on the chat so you can have it handy, and please do not hesitate to contact him, and of course follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and so on. There is a number of activities that will take place from now to the remaining of the year, and then implementation of projects next year. So get to know all that by contacting the project lead coordinator, local coordinator in Belize, Mr. Henry Wade. Okay, thank you very much. The time has advanced. We still have some time for questions and answer, and so I have grouped them. Thank you for all the interaction in the chat. Very rich, a lot of comments, a lot of observations, a lot of ideas. Yes, questions, of course. I hope this exchange was useful enough for all of you to get a big and a panoramic view of what open government is and how it could be useful in many ways. I hope that's the case. And of course, it is a good problem that we ignite that with this webinar and this exchange, because that's exactly what we want to happen, for you to engage, to have all ideas, to share with Mr. Henry Wade there in Belize, so that we can, and the project that we have be a resource to the government of Belize, to the civil society of Belize, to you, the citizen, to address open government there in Belize. So thank you very much. Um, so as I say, I grouped some questions. I'm just going to address them for the speakers. But if the speakers, either Joe, Mary Beth, or Mark, identify any question or any comment in the chat that you want to address, please feel free to do so. I left some questions out because I think they were responded with the presentations. There is good stuff that we can probably again reiterate in that regard. Marvin Vasquez, for example, asked a very first question about the OGP. Is the OGP the entity serving as the body for monitoring and compliance to ensure countries are accountable and transparent with open access information? I'm just going to leave that open. I'm sure that's for you to take. Osmani Salas, to the moderator and presenters, wants to explain the steps that a country government needs to take in order to join the OGP. That was presented by Joe as well. But also please elaborate on the eligibility criteria. So maybe in a quick overview and something in particular that you can highlight there. Joe, I know you went through it, but it seems that is still question about it. Another one, how do we create a bottom-up approach or culture in governance for the inclusion of CSOs, increase participation to be heard, and be able to positively influence decision-making from public consultations? Great question. There's a lot of knowledge here from the OGP side, from the United States side, and from the Canada side. I hope all three of you could address that. How do we can create a bottom-up approach of culture and governance for the inclusion of CSOs? That's another great question. Then another one, with open information available, this also raised the concern for privacy and security. What measures could be taken to safeguard the privacy of citizens, especially if they are employed by the public agencies in Belize? Great question. Personal information, it's a huge topic right now. And so any thoughts that speakers can share on that, that'd be great. And then one final, there's many more, but as I said, I just packaged those. What can we, the civil society organizations, CSOs, and even ordinary citizens do to push government to adopt OGP? Great questions all. Maybe I will give the microphone first to Joe, as in starting the order in which you presented, to address some of the questions and to deepen in some of the items that were questioned there. Feel free to open your mic, Joe, and respond and get a feedback on those questions. And if Mary Beth wants to jump in, since you're there, feel free.
Okay, thanks, Mike, and thanks for the great questions. I can see there's a very vibrant discussion happening in the chat, which is great to see. Let me just address quickly the how to join OGP, and then the question about some experience from other countries about civil society coordinating to kind of push this effort. So in terms of joining, in the practicalities, just to go in one more level of detail on the eligibility criteria. So under fiscal transparency, we award 2 points if the government publishes an executive budget proposal, and 2 points if it publishes an audit report. And these are published in a timely way. So I think all of the participants from Belize would know better if the publication of those documents is happening or not. And you should be able to just send us links of those. The second area is access to information. So if you have a law on access to information, it's 4 points. A draft law is 3 points, and a constitutional provision is 2 points. My understanding is Belize has an access to information law, so we'd already score 4 points in that area. Then under asset disclosure, We award points based on whether there is a law requiring disclosure and there's a requirement for the information to be made publicly available. And again, my understanding is Belize does have an asset disclosure law, so would score 4 points in that area. And then finally, under citizen engagement, we use a third-party index which assesses civil liberties. So in terms of whether Belize is eligible, I think currently you have 8 points, and we would need to assess on the fiscal transparency whether those documents are open or not. And overall, a country needs 75% to join, so 12 out of 16 points in total to join. So if Belize does publish these budget documents, it would be eligible to join. And I'd be happy to discuss by email or offline, or maybe through Mike, more details on that. If you are eligible, it means that you can. The government has the option to join, and in order to make that formal, it needs to decide which minister is going to lead on open government. So in some countries, it's the Prime Minister's office, or Ministry of Information, or Ministry of Finance, or Public Administration. It varies from country to country which ministry has the lead. But that minister or the head of state needs to write a letter of intent to the OGP co-chairs. So currently the government of Georgia and a civil society leader from South Africa called Mukulani Dimba. Once that letter has been sent, it should kick off a process of government and civil society working together on an open government action plan. On the OGP website, opengovpartnership.org, you can see under each country hundreds of these action plans. So as Mary Beth said, the US has done 3, and working on a 4th one. Some countries have done 1 or 2, some are doing their first ever plan. But you can go and have a look at other countries to see what types of reforms they've included in their open government plan, and see what would be most relevant in the Belize context. Once that action plan has been completed, it's sent to OGP, and then somebody asked about monitoring and evaluation. We then appoint an independent researcher, normally from a think tank or an academic institution in Belize, who would be the assessor of implementation. And they assess according to an international methodology, which OGP's independent reporting mechanism secures, and make sure that there's a quality control of those reporting elements. So that's on the formalities. And let me just answer also the question from some people around what civil society should do now. I really like the idea someone had about creating a group of civil society organizations working on open government. And that has been a very successful strategy in other countries. So for example, in Nigeria, in West Africa, a group of civil society organizations ran a campaign for the government to join OGP. So they created a working group, and they then designed some reforms that they would like to see the government implement through OGP, which made it really practical. Because sometimes government is obviously nervous, like, what is this OGP thing? What are the obligations? But when they saw from Nigerian civil society what the asks were in terms of specific reforms, it actually helped them understand the benefit of joining OGP. And then President Buhari announced that he was joining in 2016. So in Belize, you could consider some kind of civil society group that helps to do this coordination. And then I think it's really important for you also to think, who are the reformers in government who would be your champions? So which are the ministries or ministers in government who would be the champion of this agenda? Where is the political will? I don't know the context of Belize well enough, but you will know which ministers would be allies of open government inside the government. One final suggestion from me, which is happening in Nepal right now. So Nepal is not an OGP member, but they are eligible to join. They have done something called an Open Government Readiness Assessment, which is a piece of analysis which looks across the government to see which areas progress needs to be made on open data, access to information, responsive government, etc. So it's like an analytical tool which can help you then identify which reforms you would prioritize if Belize were to join OGP in the future. Very final point, then hand over to Mary Beth. In mid-July, we have the 5th Global Summit of the Open Government Partnership in Tbilisi, Georgia. There will be some countries that are announcing they're joining in Tbilisi. It may be a bit early for Belize, and that's only 7 weeks away. But just to keep in mind, there are international summits and meetings where it could be a very good moment to try and campaign for the Belize government to consider joining OGP, because it would give them some international spotlight and attention for their work.
I think Joe covered many of the questions in his analysis just now, but I will address the question about privacy and security. All governments have a responsibility to their citizens to safeguard some of their personal information. And that is a trust that all governments have to maintain with their citizens, whether it's their tax information, whether it is some of their personal identifying information, their social security number, or that sort of thing. And that is something that all governments must figure out how to do. And so when we're talking about open data and open government, we are not talking about making all information open to everyone, because you still have to maintain a system of that personal identifiable information for your citizens, right? And so that is something that all governments still have to figure out how to explain to their citizens when they start talking about open government, open data, particularly where you have a citizenry that might not all have a basic level of education. That is something that when you start throwing around these terms that aren't really commonly understood, like open data, open information, open government, you really do have to take a step back and make sure that people understand that you're not talking about giving away their personal information. And so that is something that, particularly in a country like Belize, we really do need to be cognizant of and find a way to explain it to people in a way that makes sense in Belize. And I just really hope that you all will know best how to do that. But I really hope that you go into this appreciating that and really think about how to do that from the outset. Because it's really hard to regain the trust of people if you don't do that at the beginning. And we've had other countries, you know, whether it's in Africa or other places, where they've had to really to go back to the beginning, and it's really slowed down their implementation process when they haven't appreciated that. You know, as Joe mentioned, the Freedom of Information Act is something that you really have to have in place and have it be at a certain level so that it is the sort of safeguard, and you have the exemptions in place so that you will not ever be in violation of disclosing a lot of this personal information or information that should always be held in confidence at that time. As Joe said, we do have these summits. You know, I'll put my civil society hat back on for a second. You know, if you're feeling really ambitious and you want to get your coalition being very active, and you might have an idea of who the government agency is that you want to try and push to be the lead, it is really important that you have one government ministry that is the designated lead, right? We need someone who is the person, the agency that is in charge. You can't really have 3 or 4 agencies that all really have the lead. You want one agency that is the designated lead, and then they cooperate and bring under the umbrella other agencies with them. Maybe they form a committee and there's one agency that is the chair. You want them to collaborate and bring other agencies under that umbrella. But we need someone who is a designated lead. And they send this letter to the OGP saying that you're ready to join. If you were feeling really ambitious in the civil society world, you could make sure that everybody has an agency that's there, get them to maybe submit what is necessary, if possible, to make sure that Belize is eligible. We have this summit in July in Georgia. All you really need is a letter in July saying that you're interested in joining, and then the hard part starts after that letter is submitted, to start having the ideas and the meetings to develop your plan. We think Canada is already going to have another meeting in this hemisphere a year from now when they are hosting the next global summit. So it might be fantastic if we had Belize join when we're having it here in this hemisphere. So that would then give you a year to develop your action plan, and we could celebrate you in Canada in 2019. But I'm just throwing on my civil society hat there and causing trouble. So I'll take it off now and turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you very much, Joe and Mary Beth. Mark, any reactions from your side? Remember, there we go. Unmute your phone.
I can't.
Hey, Mark, do you have any reactions from your side? Okay. While Mark gets ready, if you have any comments or reactions to the questions and the comments, please feel free to jump in.
Hi, this is Mary Beth. I just see one more question come up. Someone, I think Henry, is asking if there's ever he's worded as a breach of obligations within the government. How does that affect the OGP status? And I'll just answer, and Joe might want to jump in as well. There have been instances, as I mentioned when I spoke earlier, OGP really is a partnership between civil society and governments, and they're treated as co-equal in the eyes of OGP. There have been instances where we have seen a backsliding in terms of how governments treat civil society in the eyes of the law, meaning that we have instances where governments have enacted regulations to shrink the civil society space in a particular country by imposing regulations on freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of press, to a point where it has become a serious issue and really created a serious sort of impact in terms of how civil society is able to engage. So we've had instances where the OGP has actually taken action to have countries not be active in OGP, even though civil society might remain active and continue to engage. So we've had instances with Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Hungary, where they are no longer participating actively in the OGP partnership. So just answer that question there.
Great, and can I just add one other thing, Mike? I think several people had mentioned the UNCAC process in the chat, and Mary Beth probably has more direct experience, but just to say, you know, Germany had not ratified UNCAC. I don't know if they have yet, or yes, they just have, but they had also joined OGP. So, you know, I think UNCAC may be symbolically important in terms of the government's commitment on anti-corruption specifically. But open government is about obviously much more than anti-corruption. So I think I wouldn't let the UNCAC process affect whether there's interest in this agenda, if you can. And it may be that there are actually important steps to that would be taken to advance UNCAC that could be parts of an open government action plan. So a bit like Mary Beth was presenting with the Sustainable Development Goals, there is actually a powerful use of OGP, which is to advance progress towards international standards and commitments that have been made by using a relatively agile 2-year OGP process in order to have specific reforms that advance progress towards SDGs or UNCAC commitments, or even the recent OAS commitments that were made in Lima as part of the Summit of Americas on corruption. I think Mark may now be back, Mike.
Yes, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Mary Beth, for those additional responses. Mark, feel free to jump in.
Hi, sorry, my screen froze temporarily. Yeah, so we will be hosting a summit in Canada. The details will be coming out soon, but yeah, that's part of our work. I wanted to reemphasize what Mary Beth said about privacy. For us, when we release open data, we require very high-level government, not ministerial, but within the government, sign off on privacy, security, and confidentiality. We're very much aware about the combination of different open data sets to reveal personal information. That's something that is an active part of our open data program. And particularly as governments more and more use artificial intelligence and machine learning, those privacy, security, and confidentiality factors come into play, and it's something that we as a government are very conscious on. Somebody in the chat also mentioned something about license expiring. Our open government license, as most open government licenses, have no expiration date. So when you download a data set under a license, it is for in perpetuity, and there are no time restrictions on it. Yeah, I think Joe and Mary Beth really answered the civil society perspective a lot better than I could, so I'll leave those questions aside for now.
Okay, great. Joe, Mary Beth, Mark, let me know if you have any other thing. We're going to be closing very soon. If you have anything to add on the chat or whatever have you, I'm just gonna close by saying and reiterating that all the material of this webinar will be shared with the participants and will be public. We're gonna make it available for everybody. The idea is to this knowledge to continue building upon what has started in Belize. Again, picking up from the different comments that we saw in the chat, what we see here with this project and is an opportunity to contribute to the strengthening of that open government ecosystem in different ways. So again, we're going to be working with our local project coordinator from here, from the OAS, from the Trust of the Americas, implementing the activities of this project to make sure that we can build on that. One thing is for sure, and this is my personal note added to the expert knowledge that was shared here, is that to do it and to do it well, it'll take not just effort, but it takes knowledge in how to do it. And so I think this is where the project can definitely plug in Belize to start building capacities of civil society organizations, government institutions, in how to go about doing open government. So not just because we have this project, we had supported from the OAS and Trust of the Americas similar processes in other countries, and so here you go. I think again, just to reiterate, I think this is where the project can definitely be supportive of this process in Belize. Needless to say, we have the Open Government Partnership represented here. Also encouraged to look at the different resources that it offers. Obviously, once the memberships are established or the joining process goes along, but as you can see by having present here in this webinar, the Deputy CEO of the OGP, they're always eager, regardless of if you're not yet a member or in the process, to share this space, to share knowledge. And thank you also to Mary Beth and of course the Government of Canada, active in OGP as a chair and with all the background that he has, also in open data and so on and so forth. So it takes knowledge, it takes effort. Let the project kick in and help. We'll be happy to continue doing that. We have already deployed some technical missions there. I had the opportunity to firsthand see this information. There's a network of NGOs that could be tackled in order to build that working group on government, civil society organizations on working group, for example, again, building up on some of the comments of Joe and Mary Beth on this as well, and many other things that can be done. So share the link of this video for, this is not just only for public offices or established civil society organizations, for citizens to know what this is all about. Again, information will go up on Facebook, just with general items, general staff. I encourage you to follow the pages on OGP at the different summits that take place. There's another regional summit. This is in the Americas, taking place this year in September on open data. It's the regional open data annual conference, and together this year it's celebrating in Argentina in September the International Open Data Conference, which Canada hosted once in 2015, if I'm not wrong, 2020, one of those years, can't remember well, but we were all there. And so there are different forums that is just not just spaces to meet people, but to actually get a lot of knowledge and the resources that come out of them. And again, plugging in from the OAS perspective with the different commitments of heads of the states and government, as Joe mentioned, out of the Summit of the Americas. Now, next week, with the General Assembly, governments taking those presidential commitments to now state commitments to do practical things. There is an umbrella for the governments to do all this, and we hope from the Organization for American States to be that umbrella, to be that resource for governments to continue deepening the understanding and strengthening open government in the region. So thank you very much to all of you participants. Thank you to the three guest speakers that we have. Thank you to the Trust of the Americas. An extended thank you to Cito again for hosting the on-site venue, for having this webinar. If you get in contact with Henry Wade, if you think your question was not addressed, then write to us. We'll be available to send any information that might be of interest to respond to that question. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because time has passed. I think we went well with also the technical aspects of the webinar in terms of video, sound, and everything else. Thank you very much. I hope to see you, and we hope to see you, all the participants in the following activities of this project. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave the platform open for a few more minutes while people leaves the platform and leaves any other comments, and continue to with the rest of the activities that we have for this day. Thank you very much. As of now, this webinar is officially closed.